Okay, guys, thank you for joining this. Hopefully very interesting meeting we're about to have. I'm just going to wait a few minutes and see who turns up. We've had 100 people who've registered. There's currently 47 of you here, so we'll give a couple more minutes for those who might be running a bit late, and then we'll get started. Okay, I've given a minute or so. If people are late, they're only going to miss me speaking, so nothing that special to do with this. All the good stuff comes after that. So thank you for joining us for the State of Decisions and Impact meeting about how statisticians and operational researchers can help civil society. So let's get started. So just some general housekeeping to start off with. Please keep your mic on mute and switch your video off. Unless you're one of the speakers, then keep those on. We recommend you position the speaker in the top right-hand corner so you can see all the slides. Please use the chat function to type your questions and send messages as opposed to raising your hand. Now, this is important. We're going to have, I'll go through the kind of schedule, but as you think of questions, feel free just to put them in the chat box. I'll be moderating that the whole time. So even if it's, well in advance of the end of the talk, if we've got questions as they come in, I can kind of deal with those as they come. Specifically as well for the panel discussion later that we're going to have at the end. If you think of something when one of the speakers is giving a little bit of content about themselves, put it in. Don't wait till the end of the talk. I can kind of deal with stuff coming in live. So the more questions we have, the better. A video of the session will be made available shortly after. But let's look at the program for today. So right now you're getting a short introduction from me, Rob Mastrodomenico, and that will continue for about 5 minutes. And then we're going to have a summary of the pro bono OR scheme and what operational research analysts do from Ruth Kaufman. And then we're going to have some speaker presentations for about 30 minutes. So we're going to have statistical support for Embrace, Wigan and Lee from Laura Howe and David Lachlan, and then operational research support from Jane Parkin. And at that point, we'll be taking our first set of questions. So if you've got questions on what anyone said so far, please, we'll answer them about 13:40, but put them in the chat as you think of them. We'll then move on to the panel discussion part of this meeting. And our panelists, Matt, Kirsten, Joe, Adriana, and Ruth will be doing a little introduction about themselves. And then really we are going to want questions from you guys on kind of what they do, your thoughts, questions for them. So the more questions we get from you, the better this session is going to be. And then we'll have a brief kind of summary of the discussion and a close, and we'll be looking to get done by 14:45. Okay, so a little bit about me. My name's Dr. Robert Mastrodomenico. I'm founder of Global Sports Statistics, an independent statistical consultancy company. I'm 13 years professional experience with nine as a consultant. Hi, for any of you joining, if you can mute your mics, that would be great. And I'm chair of Statisticians for Society, which is a pro bono initiative run by the Royal Statistical Society. I've been involved with the RSS for about 10 years now, doing a variety of different things as a volunteer, being a trustee and other kind of things within the society. So fairly involved in this world. And yeah, this Statisticians for Society is the latest thing and probably one of the most rewarding things I've done through the society. The purpose of this event is to kind of promote the work of our member volunteers and organizations have supported. So it's to kind of increase awareness in the sector about kind of data and just, the role that takes and decisions that could be made from it. We've seen in the last few days some big decisions made from data, be it good or bad. But this is the kind of use of data and how it can be embraced, especially within the charitable sector, is becoming more and more relevant. And we've obviously got two great organisations in the OR Society and the Royal Statistical Society talking about what we can kind of offer. So we want to kind of increase the awareness about the kind of pro bono initiatives that we have on offer. And so understand ways that data are used in the sector and how these initiatives can help, because these initiatives are great. I'm obviously biased because I'm speaking on behalf of the RSS, but I think they're really good things. And if you're not familiar with them, hopefully by the end of this session, you will be. And maybe it's something you want to use and embrace, because we've helped lots of charities to kind of make benefit from this. So I'm from the RSS in terms of I'm a volunteer there, I'm a member, I'm a statistician by trade. And so what is Statisticians for Society? Well, it's a kind of initiative to connect small charities with professional statisticians. And the aim is to provide kind of help to do data analysis, any kind of research, presenting data, all that type of thing that you might have and you need for a charity. We're looking to kind of match you up with professionals to help you do this. It was originally a pilot scheme, but now we've got funding for the next 5 years, which is great. And so we can get out there and help more charities. Who can request the support? Well, any third sector organizations, charities, social enterprises, community interest groups. The kind of criteria is you have to be based in the UK and you have to have an annual income of less than 500,000. So we're talking about small charities. And so far we've connected more than 60 organizations with professional statisticians. And these professional statisticians are members of the society, and you'd be surprised, there's some excellent statisticians, eminent people there who are kind of giving up their time to kind of help charities to embrace their data and do more with it. But that's me. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and I am going to introduce our next speaker, Ruth Kaufman. She is a former president of the Operational Research Society and currently chairs the Pro Bono OR Steering Group, as well as a charitable work with the OR Society. She is currently chair of CHIRP, the Aviation and Maritime Safety Charity, a trustee of 2 other charities and advisor to the Finance Committee of the National Federation of Women's Institutes, and is a former chair of Domestic Violence Counselling Charity Women's Trust. And I'm going to hand over to her to talk to you about Pro Bono operational research.
Thanks ever so much, Rob, and thank you very much for inviting Pro Bono OR to be part of this event. Can you all hear me? Can you put your thumb up if you can hear me? Yeah, a nod. That's good enough. Thank you very much. As well as all of the third sector involvement that Rob described, I also spent a lifetime working in operational research and in other forms of management. So I have a background, I have a foot in both sectors. And if I want to talk about pro bono operational research to any audience, I will usually start off by explaining what operational research is, because so few people have heard of OR, and even where everybody's heard of OR, everybody disagrees about what it is. I have the floor, so I get to define it at the moment. OR doesn't start with the data, which is where statistics might start. It starts with the need. It starts at the problem owner's end with whatever need they have for some sort of a better outcome or different outcome from what they currently have. So it's starting at that problem end. And that need might be greater efficiency, it might be higher quality, it might be reduction in risk, it might be improving impact, whatever. And it might be addressed through any one of the activities of an organization that has the need. And the key thing about operational research is that it will bring scientific methods to bear on addressing those issues. What do I mean by scientific methods? A whole range of different possibilities, from facilitation of groups, problem structuring, evidence gathering and analysis. You can see where the overlap comes here with the RSS, and why so many members of the Operational Research Society are also members of the RSS, and mathematical and computer modeling to help address the decision-making and design systems. And the mathematical and computer modeling is generally particularly associated with OR, even though I've just put it as one small part there at the bottom. So operational research is especially useful if the world that you're in has complexity, messiness, lots of stakeholders, lots of objectives, lots of uncertainty. A lot of the sorts of questions that OR addresses can be addressed by senior managers, or indeed junior managers, or anybody who's involved in the problem for themselves. It becomes worth involving professionals the more difficult the situation is. So that's OR. The OR Society is a charity and a learner society like the RSS, and our object is to promote the understanding and awareness of OR and education in OR. We were founded 70 years ago, which is actually only about 10 years or so after the emergence of operational research as a discipline during the Second World War, just before the Second World War. The society itself has about 3,000 members across the economy, and it set up Pro Bono OR 10 years ago. Is that 10 years ago? Nearly 10 years ago, as a bottom-up initiative from members. And it actually funds Pro Bono OR entirely itself. So it sees it as part of its own mission to promote the awareness and understanding of OR. And it's also one of the things that it can do to support the third sector and to enable its members, who are often really keen to share their skills with other organizations, to do a bit of good in the world. So that's the description of what Pro Bono OR is there for. And it is open to any organization. I say any organization. We prefer not to work with organizations outside the UK, mainly because there are local operational researchers and local operational research societies. The UK is one of the biggest, it's the second largest OR society in the world, and it does not want to undermine local OR capability. But apart from that, it's open to anybody, because we recognize even the giant organizations run on volunteers. And if you can inspire volunteers, you can inspire OR volunteers, then we are happy to encourage the meeting of minds between an OR volunteer, a potential volunteer, and an organization. So the scheme itself, which is administered by Amy Hughes, who is also administering this Zoom meeting, helps charities first to understand whether and how OR can help, because quite often you have a problem, you don't know exactly where to start engaging in it and what you want to do with it. So it helps first to understand what we might be able to do, and then puts them in touch with willing volunteers. There's a few of the organizations we've worked with tiny ones, one-person organizations, right up to some of the biggest, and had very satisfying feedback from many of our client organizations. So that is all I think I need to say, or would like to say, about Pro Bono OR. But of course, if you would like to follow up or want to know anything more about it, do please put something in the chat, get through to Amy Hughes, or follow up with any of those links. Thanks very much, Rob. I shall stop sharing now, and back to you.
Thank you very much, Ruth. And again, questions for either of us so far, please put them in the chat. We will deal with them after our next set of speakers. So our first set of speakers, who feel free to take control with screen share, is Laura Howe and David Locklin. And Laura and David will be discussing how they got involved with Statisticians for Society and what statistical support they provided the charity Embrace, Wigan and Lee, and what the outcomes were. Laura is currently working as a statistician for the Government Statistical Service, and David is a statistical officer for HMRC. So I'll hand it over to you guys. And we can't hear you if you thought we could.
Can I just check everyone?
Yep, all good.
Yeah, awesome. So yeah, so as Rob was saying, this is we've been invited along today to talk about our experience of the Statisticians for Society. We got involved, you know, we've been through the whole process from start to finish, and we're just going to take you through that kind of journey of our experience with it and how we helped the local charity called Embrace, Wigan and Lee. So just to introduce ourselves, so myself, I'm a statistician who works within HMRC. I primarily focus on data quality, looking inwards at our big data systems, trying to improve the efficiency of those systems and the data flows. I'll let Laura introduce herself so I don't make a mistake.
Hi, I'm Laura, and I'm also a statistician in HMRC. I'm based in the customs policy area, so I'm involved with a lot of customs policy analysis and operational work.
Yep, and the project, what we got involved with, as we already mentioned, Embrace, Wigan and Lee, required help with the collection of data across 2 of the projects, and we wanted to be able to get involved and help improve the efficiencies of both of those projects. So just a bit of background. Be able to go to the next slide, Laura. Thank you. We're both members of the RSS as well. So we was able to see the advertisement for the Statisticians for Society. Both of us independently decided that it looked like a good idea and something we'd be looking forward to get involved with, give something back to the local community. Both signed up. We could see regular opportunities to get involved with something, and we saw one local to us both, which was based in Wigan. Both of us wanted to apply, sent in an application, and when we realised we were both interested in the same one, we decided to work together to do that. So there was no competitive edge in the office, I guess. So we were linked up with Amica, who provided us with loads of support throughout the whole project, which really give us like a helping hand in terms of making sure we steer things in the right direction, and linked us with Embrace so that we could actually meet up and get, have a chat with the charity in person ourselves. And as I already mentioned, the RSS offered lots of support, lots of guidance, and anything we needed, we could be supported by the organisation.
Okay, so just a bit of background to Embrace Wigan and Lee. So they're a user-led charity dedicated to supporting disabled people in the Wigan and Lee borough. They were founded in 2000, and so far Embrace have supported over 5,000 disabled people across the borough every year. So they're quite an important charity to the local community. Their main ambition is to ensure that all disabled people have the opportunity to be valued, included, and have a real choice. And there was a number of projects that they actually do in the charity, and they have numerous funders as well involved, including Wigan Council, the National Lottery, and Children in Need. But there was 2 key projects that they wanted some support off us from, and that was the Behaviour Support Project and the Parent Support Service, which we'll go on to in a bit more detail.
Yeah, so just to take you through our work proposal, so working with the RSS and with the initiative, as I mentioned, there was quite a lot of structure around it, which is really helpful. I think it's really important to identify that we were given a documentation to fill in, which asked all the right questions so that we knew exactly what we was trying to deliver ourselves as well. So there's plenty of that support. So in terms of the work proposal, we was asked to basically have a meeting and fill in a form and send it to the RSS to make sure that everyone's happy and sign it off to say what we was looking to do. So our key objectives really from the work that we were involved was that the key one was to develop the current methods of collecting data. So that was looking at the way that they currently collected data from clients and so on and so forth, and see if there's any ways where we could improve that methodology or system of collecting information. We also wanted to improve the consistency. Now this was not just with like in silos within the projects, but also is there any way we can improve the consistency across the charity, across multiple projects? So if they've got 2 projects on the go and they overlap, how comparable is that data that they hold and the interventions that they take place? We also said that we'll explore some of the data that they had and suggest possible analysis and help in that method. And again, just to reiterate that it was promoting that consistency across projects rather than just within projects.
So as I mentioned, one of the projects that we helped with was the Behavioural Support Project. So just a bit of background to what the support project was doing. So the behaviour support service was designed to improve the lives of children aged 2 to 12 whose day-to-day life was affected by neurodevelopment conditions. So Embrace understand that these children with conditions of this nature often find managing their emotions quite difficult, resulting in a reduced self-esteem, relationship breakdowns, and becoming aggressive with parents and siblings. So the whole point of the project was to try and reduce or resolve these problems. This project was actually funded by Children in Need. So what input we were trying to have was any questionnaires, as you can see on the screen at the moment, that they were using to collect data. We were helping to try and improve those questionnaires and the data collection. So there was 4 bits of support that was offered to the children and their families. So they offered one-to-one support. They also offered training and online resources and also peer support. So we're just trying to see and capture what the effect of all these variants in support had on children and their families. So as you can see from this questionnaire, this is what they were using to collect data. And as I said, we came up with a few recommendations to how they could improve it going forwards. So one of the key recommendations was, as I said, there was 4 different types of support that were actually being offered. And also often they weren't just provided with one element of that support. So they could be having a combination of one-to-one support and training and so on. So it was trying to drum down what the actual effect that we might see in the data, what it was down to, whether it was down to a combination or whether it was just down to one-to-one support that was actually proving to be more successful. So we kind of advise that, you know, they should record the type of support each child is receiving in case there is a combinational effect going on. We also advised that, which we'll probably move on to on the other slide, is that with this data, as you can see, if I just go back to the questionnaire, they were often asking for parents and carers to reflect back on something, whereas it would have been easier if we just collected information at baseline and then asked a similar set of questions following up once they've received the support that they have. So we kind of mentioned that as a suggestion for improvement. We also mentioned about the use of anonymized IDs, so giving each child and their family an ID, so then we can, you know, match up at baseline and the support and intervention that was provided. There was also, the charity mentioned that they will also try and ask these questions and capture data on siblings. So we were just trying to make sure that that didn't kind of get mixed up with the actual children that we were considering for this support, and that was clearly captured on them questionnaires, and then we could analyse that separately as well. And as you can see again, if I go back to the questionnaire, these early questions are kind of asking the parents, carers, whether the support provided had a positive impact on the child's relationships. It's quite a difficult question for a parent or carer to answer. You know, what someone might deem as a significant change might be very different to someone else. So we advise like the use of Likert scales to record responses at baseline and then post whatever support that had been provided to assess these impacts would be a bit easier rather than it. So it's a bit more objective rather than being subjective. Also, we mentioned about using standardized questionnaires where possible. So as you can see, sorry if I just go back again, we're trying to assess stress and anxiety here, which is quite tricky for someone to observe as a parent or carer. So we were trying to say where possible, could a standardized questionnaire be used there? We did advise, though, whatever questionnaire that they might say would be possible in this situation, that they look at what kind of client group it has been validated on in the past, so to check that it's actually suitable for the children that we're considering in this particular case. And other things we advised them on was, you know, that there's online software out there available to create surveys and questionnaires as well going forwards. But we were quite careful about this recommendation that, you know, they obviously look at GDPR rules and make sure that they're aware of all of that as well before they go along that route. So these were some of the recommendations and improvements that we advised on in terms of this project. And David will go on and mention about the other project that we helped with as well, which was the parent support service.
Yep, so this second project is exactly what it says on the tin. It was the service provided by professionals within the charity to help support parents who had children with different types of disabilities, from anything from helping to cope with the disability as a parent, or if it's costing financial or stress, and mental health effects on the parents as well. So there's quite a few avenues for support on this as well. So again, with the data collection, so just without going over what Laura's already said already, there's a few additional things that we mentioned about what we could suggest for that. So the first piece of advice was to use formulas for calculations. So for example, the recorded start dates and end dates, and they were quite interested for analysis purposes how long particular cases went on for. Now, if you're recording that manually, like they were doing, you got the chances of human error in there. Whereas if you're already collecting the start and end date of a particular case, you can use calculations within some of the tools that they already have access to be able to make sure that you're avoiding or minimizing the chances of human error. Because where it is functions in Excel to calculate the number of days and even the number of work days between a start and end date. Adding on to that as well, there's also applying the validation rules. So in terms of validation rules, again, just using the dates as an example, a date closing obviously shouldn't appear before a date opening on a case. So it's just making sure that it flags up that there's an error if there's issues that are. Another example is if they're using Mr. and Mrs. To refer to people, and they're recording gender, obviously you want them to kind of align as well. If you're recording someone as Mrs. and you're recording them as a male, issues there as well. Going on as well with just a few other suggestions when it comes to recording the data and collecting it off the individual parents. The use of drop-down lists. So and also that kind of ropes into reducing the missing data. With the drop-down lists, it avoids spelling mistakes, it avoids things being spelt with different sensitivities, shall we say, like capital letters and lowercase letters. So it's easier to compare. If you're doing a piece of analysis or you're trying to use that data to secure more funding for your charity, you have to cleanse the data first before you can do analysis. If you have these issues in there, it's going to take you longer to use that data effectively. So they're all quite simple suggestions, but not everyone is going to pick up on these type of things. And this is where we can really help, because this is like statisticians' bread and butter, I guess. But we're able to offer that service, and it was a huge help for the charity. With the drop-down list as well, we did find that there was a particular column which was a reason for a case closing. We found a good percentage of blanks in there, which means that data has not been recorded. And there might be very well good reasons for that. But if you provide a drop-down list, you can provide additional options such as other or not applicable, and you can select them. So there's a better understanding of what missing data actually means, rather than thinking, is that a mistake or does that mean something else? So we made those type of suggestions. And again, we just reiterated the point as well. So when it comes to collecting data, it's good to have a baseline data collection before an intervention starts. So if you're working with a parent, if you just take information after you've done it and say, do you feel better or worse after 6 months, say they might not remember how they felt 6 months ago. it's really important to get that baseline so that you can ask them beforehand and after and be able to say, well, this is the change, this is what's gone well, what hasn't gone well. So yeah, so I think we'll just move on to the next one. I'll pass you back to Laura.
Yeah, so I'll just be a bit, I'm not sure how much time we've got at the moment. So this is just, we gave the charity some SPSS tips. So the reason for this is most of what we were involved with was advising on data collection and how they could improve how they're already doing the data collection and also what questionnaires they were using. But as you can see, they had started the process of collecting that data. So we were just advising what possible analysis they could do further down the line. And actually the manager at Embrace actually had access to SPSS. So it was a statistical tool that he was kind of used to. So we just gave a few tips of what they could possibly do with the analysis based on that tool, but maybe going forward they would use a different package. So these are the type of things that we advised on. So how they'd go about importing Excel files and calculating new variables and recoding old variables, descriptive statistics, and then also if they had, the data collected before and after the intervention, then they could do, for example, paired samples t-tests, and it was just kind of providing a bit of statistical teaching on what they need to look for when they're looking at particular methods to use, what assumptions they need to test for. So we kind of pulled together a help guide that they could use potentially going forward, just to give them a bit of context with what kind of analysis they could do in the future.
So just real quick, on a summary basis, we was able to provide strong recommendations for methods of collecting data on both projects which we're working on. In turn, this added strong credibility to some of the work that they were producing to be able to secure additional funding or be able to highlight exactly their impact on the community, which is really powerful for that particular charity. We was able to give them methods that actually assess the impacts of intervention, and this was again with the baseline and post surveys. They can do a statistical significant measurement for that intervention, again adding more credibility to the work that they're producing, and was able to provide them with advice on how to use the tools what they already had in place to do that analysis. And this case study can be found on the RSS website under the Statisticians for Society landing page. And finally,
this is the final slide because we just wanted to share our reflections with you all, because I know there's probably some statisticians out there and also charities, but both me and David found this a really rewarding process, being able to give something back. It doesn't take that much time. I'd say me and David probably spent 50 hours, and that's between us, on this project, and that's including meetings and writing reports, and that was over quite a few months as well. It's helped to develop our communication, organisational and time management skills, because we're trying to fit this work in alongside our day jobs. But as I said, it's definitely not a big task, and it's really rewarding. So I definitely recommend anyone to join up if they are interested. It helps to develop your understanding of how charities are run and what's involved with funding applications as well. And just as an added extra, I was actually asked to carry on supporting the charity once this project had finished. So I now attend quarterly management committee meetings and sit on there as a bit of an expert for the stats side. And that's been really rewarding as well, because I've been able to kind of advise on future funding applications that are coming in and give a bit of input on how they could maybe present the data a bit better. So I definitely recommend getting involved. But yeah, that's it from me and David.
so thank you very much. Pass you back to
Thank
Rob.
you.
That's great. Thank you, guys. Jane, if you could start sharing your screen, that would be great. Just a quick note for those of you who are late on, just general housekeeping, mute your mics, stop your videos unless you're a presenter. I'm going to now introduce Jane Parkin. She's an independent OR consultant at Car House Consulting. She's 20 years experience in providing operational research solutions across a range of industries. And Jane will be discussing her volunteer experience and project involvement with Pro Bono OR. Jane's presentation will focus on her Pro Bono OR project with the national organisation Crime Stoppers and how she helped them to cope with the increased business while improving their performance without increasing their staffing costs. Before I hand over, remember, any questions, put them on the chat. I will cover the questions generally to all people who are on here, so we can everyone can get answers. So even if they have been answered in the chat and they're relevant, they'll get asked again. But without further ado, I'll hand over to you, Jane.
Thanks, Rob. Hello, folks. Good to see you all, or not see some of you, but I know you're all here. I've been involved with OR for a long time. When I discovered it, I thought, yes, I can use my mathematical background to help make the world work better. So I'm a member of the OR Society, and I'm also a member of the Royal Statistical Society. I've experience of working in universities. I've worked in the private sector, the public sector. I worked in the government OR service for a while, and I work as an independent consultant. And I've been involved in Pro Bono OR ever since it started. And one project, well, before I go into the project, the thing I like about OR is once you've gathered data, you can actually build models and use the models to see how you can make things work better. And I'm particularly interested in making better use of resources, because charities are obviously very tight on resources and want to do as much as they possibly can with the resources they've got. So some of the examples we can think about is, you've got a lot of staff, paid staff. How do you best use them? You've got a lot of volunteers. How to best use those? If you have to visit clients, what's the best way to plan the visits? If you've got some vehicles, how do you use them most effectively? And there are lots of other examples, such as stocking shops, organising collections, and so on. So a while ago, we got asked if we could help Crime Stoppers. You probably know about Crime Stoppers. You've just got a free phone number and you can ring up and report a crime, and you can do it anonymously. And they're fairly large scale. So the year that they got in touch with us, they'd already got 95,000 phone calls. And the results, they have a huge impact. You see, they got thousands of criminals arrested and charges, millions worth of illegal drugs seized, stolen goods recovered. And they came to us in Pro Bono OR saying that their telephone call centre was about to take over a whole additional area of the country. So they were expecting to get a 60% increase in business, but they had no more money. So what could they do about scheduling their staff to try to answer all the calls that came in? So the approach we had, myself and a colleague, Sue Merchant, who is also an ex-president of the OR Society and used to be an analyst with the Metropolitan Police, we had a meeting with the performance manager and the HR manager to find out about the operation, about the problem they'd got, about how they measured performance, and to discuss what sort of data we would need and what sort of data they could find and what sort of data they could not find, which is another interesting one. And the data we got, we did some analysis and we found there were certain times of day that got most phone calls and certain days of the week that got most phone calls. What we were looking for was a model that we could test out with different ways of rostering the staff and seeing what effect it would have on the performance level. So we decided a simulation model would be a good one to deal with. Simulation models are very good where you've got things happen randomly. So you never know when the next phone call is going to come in. When it does come in, you never know how long it's going to take to answer. So this is where a simulation model is really powerful. We were very lucky, and with Pro Bono OR, it's generally the case that if we want some specialist software for doing analysis free, the company that provides the software will generally let us have it. So there's a company called Lanner that's one of the top companies in the UK for simulation modeling, and they gave us a free copy of their software called Prism. And we built a model to look at different ways of running the operation and different ways of assigning staff to shifts. And then when we'd done that, we went back with the model to the managers and we showed the model to them, and real time, they could say, oh, look, we seem to have a problem on Saturday mornings. Let's try shifting some of the staff from here to here. We could try it and immediately see the impact on the performance. So I've just produced one screenshot of the model outputs, which I admit looks fairly complicated. But some of the crucial things, we were running the model on the shift patterns they had at that moment. And the first crucial thing that we saw straight away was at the service level, which was how many phone calls were answered within 20 seconds, was running at just under 86%. And their target was that 90% of calls should be answered in 20 seconds. So we knew straight away that with the current staffing, we're not meeting the performance target. Another really useful bit of information that we got was the staff utilization, and the staff who were handling calls were only 50% utilized. So that gives you a feeling straight away that you've probably got enough staff, you've just not got them at the right time. Once you've got those high level performance metrics, you could then drill down and look at a chart. And this is a very messy chart, but if you get down to it, it can tell you a lot of interesting information. So the blue line is the service level. So when it's running at 100%, that means that you're managing to answer 100% of the calls within 20 seconds. And you can see over a week when it's running at 100% and when it's dipping way down below 100%. And at the same time, the green line shows how busy your staff are handling the calls. So if you look at midnight on Monday, for example, you can see that, okay, you answered your calls 100%, but your staff were only busy less than 20% of the time. So by looking at this, we can highlight the times when the staff are very busy and not enough calls are being answered within the official performance target time. So once we got the model and those outputs, we could talk to the clients and discuss how we were going to change the staff schedules. So we had quite a long session with the clients. We talked to the performance manager and the HR manager, and we pulled together two charts. The first one showing what percentage of calls were answered in 20 seconds. And the second one that the staff were also bothered about was how many phone calls got abandoned when people gave up hanging on and just rang off. And so we tested out several alternatives, and you can see that each alternative improved the performance, and each alternative also led to a reduction in abandoned calls. So by the time we'd finished alternative 5, the managers were happy that that solution would be a good one to solve the problem. So they introduced the new shift patterns, and after the end of a month, they got the performance figures and compared them, and they found that the service levels had improved from 90% to 94%. The abandoned calls had actually halved from 12% to 6%. The average time to answer a call was slashed from 28 seconds to 13 seconds. And I got a lovely email from the performance manager saying that they're grinning like Cheshire cats. They feel it was really worth it. So it took a lot of time and a lot of effort on their part to collect the data, and on their part to put aside some time to discuss the model, look at the model and suggest alternatives. But it was a very positive result. And an interesting one is recently Crime Stoppers have come back, and their business has developed considerably from when we did the first problem, because when we did the first problem, they just had the Crime Stoppers phone line and you can online forms to report a crime. But now there are a lot of new business lines. You've possibly heard that there's now a COVID fraud hotline, for example, that was just set up last month. So they asked us to do another simulation model. We couldn't use the software we used last time, which was a very basic, simple model. So we're now doing a more complicated model, and we're using a different simulation software company who again have very generously let us have the software for free, but also let us have the use of one of their consultants to help develop the model. So the plans are that this time we will hand the model over to Crime Stoppers, we'll train them, we'll give them a user guide, and then they can test out different scenarios themselves as and when the business changes. And that was everything from me. I gather we'll leave the questions till the end. So thank you very much, and I'll hand back to Rob.
Thank you, Jane. That was excellent. 2 great talks, 3 great talks. I don't classify mine as a talk. And it now is time for questions. We have 10 minutes for questions. There are some available on the chat, which I'm just going to go to, because obviously if this is being recorded, we can kind of get these out there to everybody. The first one from Sarah, and this is to anybody who's just done the talk. Is there help available for situations where the historical data is out there already, but it needs collating and analysing? I don't know if anyone wants to take that.
It's a straight yes from OR, yeah.
And I can go straight yes from the RSS as well. And obviously it's all in the kind of scope of the project, and just kind of making us aware of what's there. And we've had projects on our side where people know what they want, but don't know how to get it. And we'll then try and find the statistician data scientist who has the skills to allow them to do it. So we really try and match you up with somebody who can kind of help you out for what you need, because like in a lot of, all across statistics, people have their own expertise. So we try and match you up with the right person there.
Yeah, I was going to add as well, like with the process for the Statistician for Society, it was, you could have that chat about what they want, and the statistician can kind of give you an intel of what they can do as well. And then you decide together on what your proposal is. So you can always have that initial chat, really. It's always available to see how they can help. So I just recommend just signing up for it, and and we'll go from there, I guess.
Exactly. And yeah, we talk to them before they even get to the volunteer at the RSS. So they'll go through multiple stages to just try and determine what the kind of need is. I don't know, OR, did you guys want to add anything onto that? Or?
Yeah, well, we also talk, of course, and one of the nice things about having government OR and government statisticians is they know a hell of a lot about what data actually is out there. So it's not just, you know, if you've got old data and you're just desperate for somebody to sort it out for you, but it's also knowing how it might fit in with what else is there. So you can use your use whoever you're working with as a source of knowledge, or they will go and find it for you, go and find what data's out there.
No, that's great. And Ruth, there was a question for you which you answered earlier, which I thought was good. And it's in terms of operational research, do you only provide support with numerical data, which I think is a good question, and I'll hand over to you.
Now, I like to say that we work with information, and information includes what people think, how people think the world works. There might be no data, there might be some qualitative data, there might be people's estimations of what the data might be, there might be numerical data that you can't trust. But we work with whatever information is available, and sometimes soft data or qualitative data is much more trustworthy than numerical data.
No, that makes complete sense. And similarly on our side, we kind of work to the problem, and you know, we try and use the skills that we've got from our members to help you solve your problems regardless of what's there. There's another good question. We've talked a lot about the kind of size of organizations that both the RSS and the OR Society support, but there was a question in terms of how small an organization, and as somebody saying, you know, under 10K a year income. From our side, you know, as long as you're not over the limit of what we can offer for, you're always considered in terms of, you know, put the application in. And we do find a kind of big mix of charities. They're not all towards that $500,000 kind of value. A lot of people are kind of running on shoestring budgets, doing really good work, and can really use this help. So from the kind of RSS point of view, we definitely welcome any kind of application as long as you fit the criteria. I won't say what the OR will say. I'll let you guys say it yourself.
Well, we're exactly the same in terms of we'll help you if you have a need, whatever size you are. I would just add that there's a whole body of OR called Community OR, which was developed, a whole collection of methods which were developed to work with groups which weren't even organizations, but had a need or sprung up in some way or another to help address their issues. Those would tend to be much more people-oriented problems and methods, but yeah, certainly you just have to be have a need that we can help with. Yep,
I concur completely. From the kind of speakers, Jane, David and Laura, in terms of kind of, you touched on it a bit, but you know, what your reasons for doing it obviously were clear, but how valuable do you think this is? And you know, just to kind of talk a little bit more about how you would encourage people to, you know, sign up for this, because it seems like it's something that you think's worth doing. I don't know if you both wanted to say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, well, what I'd say on that was the original motive from my personal point of view was it was a local charity in my local area which I could actually offer help for. So my daily work was helping HMRC, massive organisation across the country, for taxes, which no one likes. But I could actually do something what like people in the local area was using, and you know, that benefit. And but I also would not back the fact that it's really good experience. Like even though in the charity we had a meeting, me and Laura, with the older stakeholders at the same time, because there was about 3 or 4 of them in the room at the time. But just that type of conversation, you don't realize how valuable some of those skills are, dealing with stakeholders, and then having a chance to actually like hold your own reins, I guess, in the analysis, rather than having to produce analysis within a certain, you know, regime within the government. It was nice to be able to like outline what we think we could do and be able to have that free rein. And it is different from the day-to-day work we do. Obviously a lot, I guess, not necessarily easy, but it was more simpler to do than some of the complex stuff you have to do with the big data across government. So, and I think we put on the slide as well, in total, we spent 50 hours on the project. I think it was over about 3 months, and that's split between 2 of us. So that's 25 hours each. And we've got some really valuable like experiences out of that. And, you know, you feel good as well for helping out. So, and it's really good if you, especially if you're a statistician or OR colleague dealing with competencies within the government, it's really good for them to sign up because it's a really strong competency to have for things like leadership and seeing the bigger picture, which I think is really important.
Yeah, I think the CPD value to any kind of statistician or anyone get involved is huge. Laura, did you have anything to add?
I think I just echo what David said, but I definitely recommend it. It is really rewarding, and as I said as well, I was asked to carry on working with the charity as well, which I've really enjoyed, and sitting on the management committee meetings, and that's just opened me up to a completely different world of how charities are run. So it definitely opens you up to more opportunities as well. So yeah, definitely recommend signing up.
Yeah, and that's a great point. That's something we always hope at the RSS we can do in terms of we're not looking for a kind of one and done relationship. It's really nice to see you've kind of carried on and you're still doing stuff with it. And we've seen that from other volunteers. Jane, from your perspective?
Yes, two aspects really. One is from my own personal experience. I started off thinking that, okay, I'm sure the world will work better if OR is used to make it work more efficiently and make the best use of resources. So I worked from the private sector, and then I realized what a huge proportion of the economy was the public sector. So I thought, I've got to go and work in government. And then I realized there was also a huge proportion in the third sector, and there wasn't the OR expertise. So I thought it was really, really important to get OR expertise into the third sector. That was from my personal point of view. But I also, when I was running teams of analysts in the government, I'm convinced that it was really, really useful for junior analysts because it was their first opportunity, as Laura and David said, to actually run a project themselves from beginning to end, be on top of it, rather than just being a small piece in a big organisation. And certainly the junior OR analysts in government tend to get sat behind a computer with a whole lot of numbers and told to analyse the numbers. They never see a client, they never talk to anybody to start with, and they've all found it such a huge impact on their lives, being able to run a project from beginning to end, and as Laura and David said, to be able to say in their competencies that they've now got communications with clients, running projects and all those sort of things. So we have a huge number of junior analysts and they're all very positive about doing it.
That's great. And at the RSS, for those who are junior, we sometimes, if it's a project not necessarily suitable for someone with not all the skills that are required, we will partner you with somebody more senior. And it's really nice in terms of to see two people on a project. It's not always the case with what we do, but we have done that from time to time. And, you know, that kind of things, I think, is really rewarding kind of for everybody involved.
Yes, we do that as well. And we've also had cases of teams of government analysts who thought it would be a good team building exercise for themselves. So they've taken on a pro bono project as a team exercise, which has also worked very well.
No, that's great. And it kind of goes to show everyone who's on the call who may be interested in this kind of the expertise that are out there. You know, we've had some kind of great speakers in this part of the session. So I'd just like to thank you all for doing the talks and kind of being part of this. I know Laura and David, you have to get off the call fairly soon. Thank you very much. You know, Jane, Ruth, stick around. We're going to have the panel session. And just, yeah, thank you again. Thank you for the questions and just thanks for those great talks because it was really, really interesting. And hopefully people have learned a lot and they will, you know, come to both the OR and the RSS to kind of get hold of some of this expert support because you might get people as good as these guys helping you out. So thank you very much. We're now going to move on quickly to the panel discussion. So just to kind of say for anyone who's joined the call, if you're not part of the speakers, if you can mute your mic and also turn off your video, that can be done by just clicking on the 3 buttons around your video that's on there. If you have got one on and you can just stop your video. So if those who are going to be on the panel discussion can just start their videos so we can kind of see who they are. And I'm not going to do the introductions like I did before. They're going to introduce themselves. So the way this is going to work is we're going to have kind of 3-minute talks from each of the people on the panel. What I would say is if people can put in the chat their questions, we won't answer them in the chat, we'll save them from the discussion, and kind of more general questions that could be answered by everybody who's on this. If not, we can just have a general chat. And as that kind of evolves, put your questions in there. I'll be keeping an eye on the chat. And so I'll just start on the list. There's no preference on this. It's just a list I'm given. We're going to start with Matt Thomas from British Red Cross. So Matt, I'm just going to hand it over to you.
Thanks very much. And thanks for the invite to be on the panel. Really exciting. I love the Royal Stat Society and really cool to be here. So my name's Matt. I am Head of Strategic Insight and Foresight at the British Red Cross. And just for people who aren't familiar with the work that we do in the UK, I'll give a quick overview of the sorts of things we do and some of the new work we've been doing over the course of the pandemic. So we work broadly in 3 areas. One is around disasters and emergency response. So that's things like fires, floods, terror attacks, and now pandemics. We also do a lot of work with refugees, people seeking asylum, and people who have been trafficked, doing things especially along the lines of accommodation support, destitution support, casework, helping them through the asylum system, helping them get set up when they get their asylum claims accepted or rejected. And the third area that we work in is around reducing health inequalities. And this is broadly about helping people to access the appropriate health and social care when they need to, and working to help people live independently in their own homes for longer, doing some services around loneliness and other forms of sort of low-level mental health. And over the last 7 or so months, we've also started a few COVID-related services and products to help people during national lockdown and all the ongoing collateral damage from it. So this is things like a support line service where people can call up for practical and emotional support, a hardship fund for people who need some short-term cash assistance, and also doing some food delivery services. And just to give a sense of the scale, over the last 7 or so months, we've assisted around 178,000 people with about 88,000 food parcels, done around 13,000 medicine deliveries, so sort of fairly high, large-scale stuff. And during this time, my team has been helping us try and identify the most vulnerable areas of the UK in which to work by producing what we've called a vulnerability index. And this is a map that tries to model at a fairly small neighbourhood level using a variety of open data sources where people might be vulnerable to the effects of the pandemic. And this is not only in terms of clinical vulnerability of catching a severe COVID infection, but also the wider health and well-being vulnerabilities, especially around mental health, and also some of the social and economic vulnerabilities that people might be experiencing. And what we're looking to do now is try to complement this. So if you think of the vulnerability index as being sort of about the demand potentially for charitable services and other services, we're trying to think about how we can model supply and capacity within communities, within the voluntary and community sector more widely, and also within the statutory system. So I'll leave it there and hand over to the next person.
I shouldn't be muting myself, should I? And next on my list is Kirsten. I'll just hand over to you.
I was about to jump in. Thanks very much for the invite, though. It's great to talk about data on a Tuesday afternoon. I'm Kirsten, and I'm head of the data lab at Social Investment Business. So SIB is a social investor and fund intermediary. We're also a charity, and we've given over, I think, 420 million of social investment to charities and social enterprises in the UK. And that kind of ranges from grants to repayable finance and business support. And the Data Lab is really there to help improve how we use data to inform our social investment decision making, and also working with other social economy partners in how they make their decisions. And I think when COVID hit, the big question we all asking ourselves was, how do we effectively prioritize limited resources in support of those communities most vulnerable? So in answer to that, we launched our COVID and Communities project, where we tried to, where we used consumer spending data to look at the changing economic vulnerability with different local places across the UK, so very UK focused. And while we were able to do that, we had quite a strong partnership with a company called Infoku, who scrapes raw data, kind of card transactions from 6 different bank data sources daily, and gave it to us at quite a localized level. So we had it at MSOA, which meant that we were able to create kind of interactive maps and data analysis pieces, a lot with the help of our partner Tortoise Media, to get it out there in the media side, just really track and see how changing consumer spend patterns emerged during COVID. And I mean, one of the highlights then, obviously go and have a look, is that we saw right after the first lockdown, there was a decrease of around 40% in consumer spend on a national level. It's been kind of increasing slowly upwards. So in August, we're back at kind of normal consumer spending levels again. But that national picture kind of covered up a huge amount of inequalities when you look at different places. So having the localized data showed us that kind of coastal communities were really hard hit. Penrith in the Lake District, for example, dropped down by 71% in consumer spending. And although staycation numbers kind of boosted them a little bit, it wasn't enough to offset the losses. So really looking at that localized spend and how it happens to inform changing economic vulnerability has been really useful. And the point of this discussion is how we've been using that type of data. And at SIB, we've been integrating it into some of our COVID recovery grant funds. So it's obviously one piece of information, whereas there's other fund priorities as well, but it's been really helpful to have that real-time sense of how economies and local economies are getting affected by COVID. So I'll leave it there. I think the key points around that project, which have been helpful, of collaboration, real-time data, and identifying the gaps. But I think we'll get more into that into the panel.
Excellent. I'm not muted this time. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Next, I'm going to hand over to Joe.
Hi there. Thanks a lot, Rob. Thanks for having me. My name's Jo Kerm. I'm joining you from Turn to Us, which is a national anti-poverty charity working across the UK. Our purpose is that so everyone has the opportunity to build financial sustainability and thrive, we offer information and support that people need in the face of life-changing events, and collaborate to tackle the causes and symptoms of poverty. And obviously COVID-19 has been a huge life-changing event, and we have been able to leverage a lot of our existing services actually. So we give grants to individuals, and we've continued to do that through the pandemic, and increased our grant giving through additional donations. So about 2 million of additional donations have gone out in grants. And then we have also been continuing our information and support services, including digital services like our benefits calculator and our grant search that allows people to find grants from other organisations that give grants to individuals. There are thousands of organisations like that across the country. And our digital services need to collect a lot of data in order to function. So to give someone an accurate benefit calculation, we need to understand their household makeup, their employment status, the amount of savings people have, etc. And we, through the benefits calculator, we helped people, about 1.5 million people, claim an additional 1.2 billion in benefits last year, and we expect that to be even higher this year. With the impacts of COVID. So with that data, we're able to really start to get a good picture of people's situations across the country and how COVID is impacting. We did a small collaboration at the beginning of the pandemic with SIB Group actually, and sharing data with Kirsten. So it was great to see that collaboration. And then we started conversations with NPC, New Philanthropy Capital, and their data science team to look at how we could understand the needs of people in communities and different vulnerabilities across the UK. And that partnership has grown, and we're recruiting new charities to join all the time. So some of those other grant giving organisations like Buttle UK have joined, Step Change, the Debt Advice Charities coming on board, as is Trussell Trust and others. and really looking at growing that partnership in the space of poverty and financial hardship, but also joining up other conversations with other organizations interested in sharing data and insight and making that actionable, which is obviously the main point, to support more people. That's the intro. We'll get into further discussion.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Ariana, you're next up.
Hello, thanks, Rob. Hi, I'm Ariana Giadima. I'm a UK portfolio manager at the National Lottery Community Fund, and I'm managing the grant for the Statisticians for Society on behalf of the National Lottery. So thank you very much for having me here today. It's great to join this really interesting conversation and hear from the sector. So assuming that not everyone knows who we are and what we do, the National Lottery Community Fund distributes money raised from national lottery players, almost 600 million every year. 83% of our funding is under 10K, which means that money goes directly to very local communities that are working on the ground. Since the 1st of April, the value of the emergency response commitments that we had is hundreds of millions from over 15,000 awards and variations. Since the 1st of April, our emergency response funding has reached over 5,600 new grantees, and at least 49% of which are micro and small organizations. We were receiving at that point on average 1,000 applications a week. 1,200 was the highest number that we've received, and it's now at an average of 700 applications a week. In total, since the 1st of April, we've received over 28,000 applications, which is more than double our usual average. And this gives a bit of a context on the way we had to work and the demand and the pressure for our funding during the pandemic. My team, the UK portfolio, is a small and agile team that sits alongside the TNLCF's 4-country directorates, those of England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, supporting projects and ideas of UK-wide impact and significance that focusing on achieving transformational change. We're uniquely positioned in the fund because we are working across themes and countries, and that enables us to link up learning and insights across all 4 countries. As a responsible community funder, one of our commitments to support civil society organizations and their community is to support civil society organizations and their communities to thrive. So to that end, insightful data enables organizations to better understand the needs of their communities, learn what works and how, improve services, demonstrate impact to funders, commissioners, and the wider society. So the UK portfolio has invested 3.5 million over the past 3 years in projects that aim to build the capacity of the sector around data and evidence. Projects such as this one are assessed as pro bono Statisticians for Society. However, this remains an area that we really believe that we have potential to catalyze significant change. And to this end, we have now committed 2 million to develop a new evidence and insights funding program that aims to build the capacity of the sector to access and use data and evidence and insights effectively. And what we mean by saying effectively, we mean having access to meaningful data that enable people, organizations, communities to reflect, learn, prove, and improve. And we also mean valuing data of all kinds, quantitative and qualitative, which generate evidence that improves understanding of context, contribution of civil society organizations and beneficiaries. As with any emergency situation where quick decisions need to be made, access to good quality and reliable data, as well as ability to analyze and interpret it, we felt that's of immense importance for the sector. So I'm really delighted to be here to discuss some of the trends that we've observed happening in civil society when it comes to data, some gaps, some opportunities, and explore some key questions together. So my colleague is also here with us, John Banks. John is the head of data and information at TNLCF and leads on a team that supports the fund to use data and evidence effectively.
Hi, John. Did you want to say a couple of words or?
Yeah, hi everyone. Excited to be here. Just enjoying all of the speakers and presentations. So I'm just here to support if there's any specific questions that are asked, but I'm sure Ariana will be able to answer most things.
Fantastic. And lastly, but certainly not least, Ruth, you're still here. Did you want to say anything more beyond what you spoke about before? The floor is yours.
If I may, I just wanted to follow up. Well, really, it follows up Ariana's point about putting money into having evidence and insights used more effectively. And I think Jane and I are both making the point that from the OR side, you start with what's your use, and then what data do you need to help that become that work. And I wanted to give an example, which actually comes from the health sector rather than the charity sector, but I think it's equally applicable for time of COVID, is in NHS Lanarkshire. And they were looking to make sure they had the critical care capacity to deal with possible patient flows. So they were starting from the need to ensure that they had adequate critical care. And they had the executive managers, the clinicians, the experts in what's actually going on the ground, and the modelers who collaborated to produce a simulation model, the same sort of model that Jane was talking about, to simulate flows of people through critical care, and therefore the flows of demand on resources and so on. And they described that as a virtual experimental laboratory, which they couldn't do as a real life trial. They didn't have time, and they wouldn't have got the buy-in or the cost. So what they had was a test bed that they could bring people around to have a look at, so people could see how it was being used. And as a result, they got a very clear picture of the outcomes and did make confident and decisions which had buy-in on the use of resources, and also started looking at wider questions. The link with data was, the model could not have worked, couldn't have delivered useful answers without data. And there's a lot of data out there, and they used local data sets, they used national data sets, and they used international data sets to feed into the various bits of knowledge that the model needed. But no data is perfect. And the advantage of an approach like this, if you're starting at the action end rather than at the data end, is that it says, whatever data you've got to hand, this is how it fits in. And then you can use what you've got and improve it as you go. So you can focus then on what data you need and where you need greater accuracy. And you can also share understanding amongst all the different people involved about the impact of the data and of the uncertainties. So you've got this sort of shared structure to how you're using the data. And you can then have a discussion amongst the collaborators about what you do about the weaknesses in data. And that's an area that really interests me. But this combination of data and modeling and judgment for the difficult bits, I think has been seen not just in the health service, but across the whole economy over the last few months. And I think we'll see a lot more of it.
No, I think that's great. And I think there's lots of good kind of points there for everybody on the panel in terms of, just getting hold of the data. I think is a big thing, like from people's perspectives. How easy is that to get the data you need? Ruth mentioned about not being enough data, or not the right data, or amalgamating it. How much is that a challenge, or is it not a challenge? Is the data there? Is it readily available from your kind of perspectives? What's about, and what are the challenges with kind of getting the data that you need? Anyone can go first.
I'll start on this one. I think from a Turn to Us perspective, we're most mature, I suppose, in terms of how we manage our data, because we build we've got a really quite mature tech team, and we build out products like our benefits calculator in-house. So in terms of how those databases are structured and how we access our data, I think that's been really positive. When we work now with other organisations, having conversations with other charities, potentially smaller organisations, that's not necessarily there, that knowledge and understanding. So we've had to offer collaborative support across to see where we can help extract data and make sure it's formatted in the right way, make sure it's consistent, so we can feed it into the NPC product, and obviously MPC have been working on that with us as well. Where we've needed more support, we need to grow, is around that analysis and the insights. So really speaking to the RSS context, and I think that's where a lot of charities are growing in their expertise, you know, starting to bring in analysts, bring in data scientists, and that's the journey that Turn to Us are definitely on this year.
In terms of your kind of the tech side in there, and just that ability to kind of get and store data, do you think that's something that a lot of places or people on this call should really kind of be looking at? You know, we've seen the issues with storing certain data in Excel sheets and how that can cause a few problems. Is that something as a kind of more general thing that people should be looking at? I get the kind of analysis inside of it that say OR and RSS can offer, and we're out there for you. But if your data's not in the right place, is that a kind of thing that people should kind of think about?
I think if this year has taught us anything, it really is assume nothing. I was really pleased in joining Turn to Us in my role at the beginning of this year. We did a data maturity assessment, which is a data kind and data orchard assessment. And so any areas around that management, storing, GDPR, that kind of stuff, it was, you know, all boxes ticked. It was when we got onto the analysis stuff that we weren't able to tick those boxes. And it's kind of like, well, you know, it's not great that we don't have these analysis skills, but ultimately I'll sleep better at night knowing that we're not, you know, badly storing and managing data on vulnerable people. So, you know, we're able to do that. So I think it's, you know, you've got to have house in order. You've got to build up from the foundations. And yeah, I would definitely say to anyone here, don't make assumptions, because there are lots of small charities that aren't, or even, you know, slightly larger charities that might not be getting those basics right, and therefore open to, you know, to certain issues. So
there's a big tick from me on that from you. Any of the other panelists have anything to add on that?
Can I go?
Yeah, of course.
Right. So brilliant case study, Ruth, and thanks for bringing it up. Actually, data, I completely agree on this, that data is a very powerful tool and it does drive decisions in evidence-based decision making. But those decisions are as good as your evidence is. And we know that there is an abundance of data in the sector, but the quality of data is a huge issue. And it does impact on both analysis and interpretation. This is somewhere that we see our role as a community funder to develop the capacity and the capability in the sector from that very initial point, which is the data collection. And we felt that this is a very, very important kind of role for us to fulfill. The only thing I'd like to highlight here is that the element of proportionality, that we are talking about, we need to be proportionate when we are talking about data, because it always depends on the kind of the size of the organization, the approach, what is the reason that data is needed, to kind of start thinking of how we can collect. That's kind of at the organizational level. When it comes to data sharing and opening up your own data, which is a trend that we've seen recently coming up in the sector, we've seen a lot of kind of cross-sector collaborations, including the ones that they've already presented by Joe and Matt. I think that there is an issue there when it comes to quality of data. And there is a lot more work that needs to happen to make sure that we've got the right data. So, and this work is more related to data architecture, is about how we are developing consistent ways of collecting data. How do we have, how we support the sector to kind of have established frameworks that they do data collection, and start from kind of that point.
No, it makes sense. Yeah, Ruth, I was going to ask you on this. You go for it.
Jane might also want to comment on this.
I was going to say as well, Jane, you can turn your video on if you want to get involved in this.
But I would say I absolutely support everything that you can do to improve data practices, data collection, and we've actually seen amazing advances over the last few years because of the spread of electronic technologies of various sorts in the availability of real-time data. But there are several things which you must always, there are certain things which will never be able to be known for certain. Things like, how will people react to a second lockdown? You've got to put in assumptions. Now, you might inform those assumptions from how they reacted last time, what they're saying in the media, everything that's going on Twitter, the noise. Always you might inform it and do try to improve your guesswork, but you will never have exactly the right data. So you also need methods for dealing with uncertainty.
Can I take over here now, Ruth? Yeah. I was just about to say, I don't know if anybody looked at the original modelling done at Imperial College about the idea of lockdown, and some of the assumptions they built in was assume that 75% of the population will obey the lockdown rules, for example. That's an assumption they made at the beginning. Now, because in operational research, we've long since realized that you can't get accurate data, that you sometimes have to make assumptions. We've developed methods for dealing with this, and we use something called sensitivity analysis, which every time we make an assumption, then we can see if the value changes a bit, is it actually going to make an awful lot of difference to the results? So when Imperial College said, let's assume that 75% of people will obey the lockdown rules, it's not difficult in any model to say, well, what if it goes down to 50%? What if it goes up to 90%? What effect does it have on hospital admissions and so on? So although exact data is wonderful if you can get it, if you can't get it, there are ways of dealing with it. Thank you, that was all.
That's great.
I also pick up on the real-time data point, because I think it's so valuable, and something particularly that has been highlighted through COVID is access to real-time data. And at some point we were getting weekly information, which was so helpful. But I think that as a social economy, we sometimes rely more heavily on government sources, and unfortunately those are a little bit more delayed. And what we really need now is, I think, in something that did work quite well with Mfoku, is essentially that was a private sector data source that them as a social purpose vehicle were able to use and extract and give to us as a charity. So we were essentially building off the data kind of investment that more commercial companies had put in to get real-time data from MasterCard, from Visa, from all these other data sources, and then repurposing it so that we can use it in the social economy. And I don't have any solutions about how we continue to go about it, but I can just see that real value in leveraging what might be more of a commercial investment, and trying to repurpose that to use it more effectively in our world when real-time data is the key issue.
Yep. Matt, anything to add from you?
Yeah, I think as well it's worth giving some love to more qualitative foresight methods as well. So like, I love all the more quant scenario planning work. It's excellent, and especially being able to do that sensitivity analysis. But we found, because it's like in our experience, it's so hard to make those models and do them well, and you have to make so many assumptions. And because we have to work quite quickly, sometimes it's almost a bit easier to do a more qualitative scenario planning exercise. Like we found that for coming into this winter, so every winter we do things like support the NHS with the winter pressures, and then at the same time respond to severe weather, floods and so on. And then because we're doing it in a pandemic, there's just so much uncertainty, and the uncertainty just changes week by week as well. So by sort of stacking up different kinds of scenarios, we found that was a much nicer way of thinking about it. So you can sort of have a baseline scenario, and then you almost do this Matryoshka doll of more and more awful things happening. And then you can figure out, okay, we'll pick this one as our reasonable worst case scenario and plan against that. But then you've got the flexibility to go down a notch or up a notch as you need into, sort of more apocalyptic territory if you need to, or downscale it if you're lucky.
That's cool. And I think from the statisticians, the miserable statistician in this corner here would say every model's terrible. It's just how bad, not terrible they are is generally, what you're dealing with. I suppose as a kind of extension, as there's no questions, you're just going to get Paxmaned by me. The data that we've got, like, how useful is that? Given all the changes that we're seeing, like, how are you supposed to deal with that? Everything's changing week by week. Lockdowns, not lockdowns, localized lockdowns, certain tiers. You know, you're getting in. We're talking about real-time data, lots of it. How useful is it, and how do you deal with data in the changing face of everything, and how useful that is, and how's that affecting everybody?
Shall I go?
Go.
Because yeah, I mean, that's exactly where we're coming from. Some of it is useful, but what's also extremely useful is experts. And I don't know, by experts, I don't mean the kind of boffin of the Daily Mail headline, I understand, but people who work in whatever field it is you're trying to support, and who know how things work, and who know the people, know the systems, know the dynamics, who can kick the tires on your assumptions about whether the past is going to be the same as the future. And in some ways it will be, and in some ways it won't be. And in some ways the experts will disagree. And again, we have, don't want to keep plugging OR, but we have methods, particularly developed from working in community OR, for working with experts who disagree, to try to bring them to understanding what's the source of disagreement. And sometime or another, you may have to make a decision between them, and sometime you may find enough common ground that you can take it forward. So never throw away the data, but it's always know that you need to kick the tires on it.
Anyone else like to comment at all?
I think reflecting on some of the most useful things I've seen over the last 7 odd months, there's been some amazing storytelling with data, and I think that's been so helpful for separating the signal from the noise. And like looking at, say, some of the media, the FT and the Economist's work has been phenomenal. ONS has been amazing at it as well. And certainly internally at the Red Cross, we've found that because we've got a lot of strategic decision makers who are not always so comfortable at dealing with data and could get quite overwhelmed by, you know, the sheer amount of activity data coming in, all the external stuff they're hearing. Being able to cut through that by telling as clear stories as you can, and collaborating with others to do that storytelling as well, and using open data to tell stories, doing everything in the open, that I think that's been a really powerful thing that helps people not get too overwhelmed.
Yep. Anything from anyone else on that point?
I would 100% agree with the data visualization. I think this has been the time for Flourish charts to thrive, and it's been great to see. And I think some of the work that we've done would not have had the reach that it has if it hadn't have been for Tortoise Media and getting it more of a public view. So kind of embracing that openness, I think, is a wonderful thing, and it all stems from how you present the information in hopefully very pretty ways.
I would just also add, you know, around bringing things together and how the data and insight is used internally. So we've done some more analysis on our benefits calculator, patterns of use, how we were able to respond at different stages to the pandemic and the economic impacts that then allow us to learn from that and take that forwards. And I think that has been overlaid for us internally with our qualitative research. As you know, Matt said, that's really important, but also co-production with people who have lived experience of financial hardship. And I would always say, you know, bringing together a staff team with their deep expertise and their knowledge of the context with data and insight, both qualitative and quantitative, but also our co-production partners, and working through solutions, new interventions or tweaks to existing interventions with those people has been incredibly rich for us.
Yeah, so just to expand on that, Joe, like in terms of what you guys are doing, you can predict based on what you've got, how are predictions being made now in terms of, you know, your benefit calculator, given the huge uncertainty. I think the term, you know, variability in everything is massive at the moment, and in any kind of model that's never good. You know, how do you deal with it on your side?
So it's interesting to see from like a more immediate perspective. We thought that the furlough scheme was coming to an end on Friday, and then a new scheme, or the continuation of the scheme, was announced on the Saturday. But many people would have received redundancy letters, and decisions would have been made on that Friday in line with the scheme ending. So we've seen huge increased use of the tool as a result of that coming through. And we know that then there's a related pattern of use for our grant search tool, because while people wait to receive their universal credit, they're then, that's a 5-week wait. So there's then a pattern where people are going out and trying to find other sources of support. So we're kind of learning from this all the time. We're also then working with our partner organisations to see how their patterns of use change as well. I don't think we're quite at the stage of being able to predict that, and it's a very unpredictable, volatile situation. But we were, because of what we learned earlier in the year, better able to anticipate and respond through both our digital services, but also our other channels like our helpline, web chat, etc., to the types of queries and issues that people would have. And I think, learning from the types of, searches people are doing on our website, on our information services, but also the types of searches from organisations that have even bigger scale, like Citizens Advice, and they've been really great at sharing, their patterns of usage of their tools, or the types of things people are looking at on their website. That's really, really interesting for us to bring in as well.
No, it's really good. It's really good. Ariana, anything to add on your side?
Yeah, so obviously, us internally, we've been ourselves on a journey to use data and evidence effectively to understand needs and shape our overall sort of strategy and direction. So one of the things that we're doing various things. So one of those is that we have improved our own systems and data collection processes via application forms, and we're monitoring our grant to ensure that we better understand where our funding goes. Another thing that we are working on is that our data team has produced a centralized dashboard using tagging in our grant management system to understand how much of our funding is benefiting certain communities. And we are analyzing these patterns, to see whether there is any actions that need to be taken to improve our reach or our access. And we also recently started developing the capacity of our funding teams when it comes to engagement with data. So we're working very closely with the data and information team to support funding officers across the fund to be able to kind of connect with data, understand the stories behind them, and use them in their decision-making process, if that makes sense.
100% makes sense. And I suppose a follow-on from that is, the concept of variability and how much variance we've got at the moment in just life. How is that kind of linking through to all the things that you guys are doing? How are you taking account of that? We've kind of touched on it briefly, but the kind of concept of, we give exact numbers, we see them every day in the news when we look at deaths and rates of deaths, so the R number, and there's no variability around that. And we kind of, as statisticians and, in any kind of analytical subject, we're always talking about variability, but rarely it's very hard to report and deal with. How do you guys deal with the fact that everything's so variable at the moment?
I mean, I have a quick one. You're never satisfied.
Yeah.
Kind of it. So you keep on iterating, you keep on adapting, and hopefully you have enough opportunity to test new models and grow. So in our world, we've been fortunate enough to be running quite a lot of different COVID grant rounds. So we've been able to integrate it in different ways and change it when we saw things changing externally, etc. But I guess it's to never be happy and think that you've got the solution, because it's probably not going to be there for the next week.
It sounds like a good plan to me.
I think for us, it's like in terms of our boots on the ground work, it's very much about capacity planning, surge planning, because especially when the tiered system of lockdowns were happening, you didn't necessarily know that far in advance where somebody was going to go into a more restrictive lockdown, and that could very much change our ability to go and physically help vulnerable people. Spinning on a sixpence. How quickly we couldn't respond. So for us, it's more about just trying to make sure we've got the right numbers of people in the right places ready to go, and just be as reactive as possible, while at the same time, keeping an eye on what might or might not be changing.
Yep, Ruth.
I think you could run an entire session just on variability. There's so many different sources of variability. So some is simply there's not enough data for you to know, for you to have a sort of reliable results. Some of it is that the situation is actually changing. Some of it is uncertainty about what you're trying to achieve, or what other people are going to do that will affect what you do. So it's partly it's putting your finger on what the sources of uncertainty are. Partly it's then thinking about whether you have any way of reducing the uncertainty or the variability, either if it's a data issue by collecting more data or better data collection, or by collaborating with the people who might be making the decision that overthrows you, or by some way controlling the future. And I think Jane's model described incorporating a sort of variable. The Crime Stoppers showed that there's the variability in the time of day that people call up, or actually are they going to call, it's the bus bunching phenomenon, or the queue bunching phenomenon. How's that going to happen? Those are sorts of variability that you can manage analytically, and then there are others that you have to do what if, and you build your scenario and you decide what's the worst thing. So for me, is it worse to not have enough people if things get really bad, or is it worse to waste things if things don't turn out to be as bad as I thought? And this is where statistics and modeling go to actually boardroom decision making. Is what are the values that we're working to? What are the important things to us? What are we going to prioritize? What bad thing are we going to try and minimize?
Yep. Anybody else want to follow on from that?
Yeah, can I go, Rob?
Yeah.
Yeah, so just on the issue of how we are kind of dealing with uncertainty, another thing that sort of came up for us, at least at the fund, in conversations around data, is that the pandemic sort of revealed gaps in data. So, for example, we've just when we wanted to kind of look at the sort of organizations that we fund from an equalities perspective, we've just realized that the data wasn't there, or wasn't the right format to do this type of work. So we've supported 360 Giving to develop the shared taxonomy that can be used across funders in the sector to classify voluntary organizations by demographic information and focusing on equality. So that would help us to kind of consistent reporting and data collection and analysis. So one thing that I've seen is like certain gaps, and how we are best placed to kind of fill in these gaps.
Yep, that makes complete sense. Just in terms of, we're coming very close. In fact, we're really close to the end of the session. If anyone has any other questions, please post them now. If not, we'll kind of wrap this up. And obviously, I want to thank all the people, all the speakers, all the people on the panel, all the kind of interesting insight that we've had, from a lot of kind of different perspectives on the use of data, on the kind of effect of COVID, on everything that's kind of been happening. And hopefully everybody who's kind of been on this meeting has kind of gained something from it and learned some things. And I mean, from the kind of RSS and OR Society, we're out there to help you. We have schemes that can come and help you. And I think Joe touched on it really nicely, in terms of that you might have the data and you might be doing all that side right, but that kind of analytical help that you need, the research, the modeling to get you over the edge that you may not have internally. These initiatives are there to help you, and we're waiting for you to come to us or find this is a kind of good advert to kind of get us out there as a resource that you guys can use, because there is a role for statisticians, OR within what you're doing most likely, and anybody who's got data and wants to do something with it, I would recommend using a professional, and especially a professional who will do it for free. That's always really nice. And so we're there. We've got, obviously, Amika's just put in the chat information about the RSS scheme. Maybe can put some information about the OR Society scheme. I would say, if you've got this data and you are looking for insight, it's always best to kind of use experts, because it's very easy to make mistakes with data. I think that's probably one thing we haven't talked on much in this, is for non-experts, it's really easy to kind of come up to the wrong conclusions, make wrong assumptions in your models, not understand how things work. And we've had some great speakers on today talking about the work that they've done with charities. And so I would definitely try and make use of this. And, hopefully there's things on here that you can take away and use in what you're doing. And yep, Amy's just put something in there as well. So in the chat, there's information about both schemes. I will stop talking because I'll just ramble for ages. And I will thank all our speakers, all our panelists. Thank you very much, guys. It's been really interesting. I appreciate it. I think everyone else does. So thank you very much. And everyone else, have a lovely rest of your day. Cheers. Bye.